Hello, friends, wherever you are in the world. Whether you're listening to this in the quiet hum of a new morning, the gentle haze of a late afternoon, or deep in the stillness of a sleepless night, I believe we're connected right now by an invisible thread, the thread of a story. The one I'm about to tell you is a journey into the heart of a storm. It's a story not just about the collapse of a civilization, but about the collapse and rebirth of a single soul. It's filled with betrayal, with quiet courage, with profound pain, and with a twist at the very end that I promise will change the way you think about enemies and about salvation. This story does not end the way you think it will. So, before we dive deep into the ash-woven anthem, let's do something small. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Your small comment is like a lighthouse signal, letting me know that I'm not just speaking into the void. Now, take a deep breath and let the story begin. In a time not so far from our own, there was the Republic of Astara. Astara wasn't just a nation, it was an idea, a monument to human achievement polished to a mirror shine. Its capital, Aethelgard, was a symphony of engineered perfection. Towers of lumen steel scraped a sky of curated blue, their surfaces reflecting the silent, graceful ballet of ether gliders below. There was no dirt, no noise, no chaos. The people of Astara didn't worship gods in ancient temples. They worshipped a more tangible deity, progress. Their god lived in the gleaming laboratories, in the life-optimizing algorithms, and in the unshakable faith of endless advancement. But far from this glittering heart, nestled in the green rolling hills of a region called Oakhaven, lived a young man named Kyle. Kyle was not a scientist or a statesman. He was a truth painter, an ancient title his family had carried for generations. They didn't just paint what the eye could see, they painted what the soul felt. And Kyle had a gift, or perhaps it was a curse. He could see the cracks in things. He would look at a flawless tower of lumen steel and see the invisible hairline fractures of stress deep within its core. He would look into the programmed smile of an Aethelgard citizen and feel the cold vacuum of anxiety swirling just beneath the surface. He saw the prosperity of an entire civilization and perceived with an aching clarity a foundational rot that was silently, patiently growing. This vision was a constant, low-grade pain in his soul. He felt a desperate compulsion to translate it onto canvas, not with monstrous images, but with subtle details. A color just slightly off-key, a brushstroke that trembled where it should have been firm, a shadow that lingered a second too long. He painted not to condemn, but to warn, like a silent watchman trying to wake a city from a beautiful, deadly dream. Kyle, "You're going to destroy yourself," Elara would often tell him. Elara, his childhood friend, a sculptor whose gifted hands could breathe life into formless clay, but whose heart was grounded in pragmatism. She loved Kyle, loved the way he saw the world, but she also feared it. "Your art, it's too honest, Kyle. Aethelgard doesn't want honesty. They want beauty. They want anthems of victory, not elegies for a disaster that hasn't even happened yet." Kyle would just look at his paint-stained hands. He knew she was right, but how could he ignore the voice that screamed inside him? How could he paint a perfect, radiant flower when he could feel the worm gnawing at its root? This conflict wasn't just between him and Elara. It was the civil war raging within his own spirit. On one side, the call of his purpose, the raw truth his ancestors had served. On the other, the simple human longing for a peaceful life, for a future with Elara, for a world not haunted by invisible fractures. Then one day, while finishing a painting of the capital's famed Chrono Gardens, Kyle felt a shudder run through him. This time he didn't just see the cracks. For the first time he heard them, a tiny crystalline sound like the microfracture of glass under immense pressure. He knew then that he could no longer stay in Oakhaven. He had to go to Aethelgard, not to seek fame, but to hold up the mirror they had so deliberately shattered. He had to show them, before it was too late, that their perfect canvas was beginning to tear. Aethelgard received Kyle not with open arms, but with a polished, sterile indifference. The air here was artificially clean, the streets were scrubbed of all imperfection, and the smiles of its citizens seemed synchronized by some central happiness algorithm. Kyle felt like a discordant note in a meticulously composed symphony. He rented a small studio space in a designated arts district and presented his first work in the capital, Aethelgard's Symphony. It was, by all accounts, a magnificent painting. Kyle had channeled all his technical skill into capturing the city's grandeur, the proud towers, the starfall of the ether gliders. At first glance, it was breathtaking, but if you lingered, if you truly let your eyes sink into the canvas, you would see it. You would see that the light reflecting off the towers seemed weary. You would see that the shadows cast by the happy citizens were unnaturally long and sharp. And if you looked very, very closely at the foundations of the great structures, you would notice the tiny thread-like cracks, painted in a shade of gray so subtle it almost merged with the concrete. But they were a whisper of fragility. The piece caused a minor stir, but not the kind Kyle had hoped for. Word of it reached the preeminent thought leaders of Astara, the Prosperity Council, led by a charismatic, handsome man named Lyros. Lyros and his council didn't preach of gods. They preached of vibrational alignment, of the law of attraction, of manifesting one's reality through the sheer force of positive thought. They were the high priests of the religion of progress. Lyros himself, with his brilliant white smile and flawlessly tailored suit, came to view the painting. He circled it once, nodding with an air of profound understanding before turning to the crowd of followers and media drones hanging on his every word. His voice, trained for maximum inspiration and authority, filled the gallery. My friends, what we have here, this is not art. This is fear given a coat of paint. This is a product of scarcity-minded, low-vibrational thinking. While we, together, are manifesting a future of boundless brilliance, there are those who choose to wallow in negativity. They look at a rose and see only the thorns. They look at a sunrise and worry only about the sunset. He turned to Kyle, his eyes a perfect blend of pity and condescension. Young man, you have a gift, but you are wielding it in service of lack. Change your mindset. Paint the reality you wish to create, not the one your fear dictates. Manifest prosperity, don't sow the seeds of doubt. The crowd erupted in applause. Lyros's words were a sweet, simple balm. They absolved everyone of the need for uncomfortable introspection. That very day, Kyle was cancelled on Astara's social networks. He was branded the painter of sadness, the joy thief, a cautionary tale of someone who refused to raise their vibration. Other galleries rescinded their offers. People who had been curious now looked at him with wary disdain. He had become a heretic in the church of toxic positivity. From Oakhaven, Ilara's voice on the call was strained with worry. I told you, Kyle, they don't want the truth. They just want a beautiful lie. The council's public shaming should have erased Kyle, but it had an unintended side effect. Out of the millions who turned their backs, a small, quiet few began to seek him out. They were the other people who saw the cracks but were too afraid to speak. An engineer who knew the safety data for the new city spire was being falsified. A therapist who saw the silent epidemic of anxiety behind the mandated smiles. A historian who knew entire chapters of Astara's brutal founding were being systematically erased from the archives. They didn't come to praise Kyle. They came for the silent confirmation his paintings offered. They came to feel for a moment that they weren't crazy. This subtle underground influence eventually reached the most powerful man in Astara, King Valerius. Valerius was no simple tyrant. He was an aesthete king, a self-styled philosopher monarch who genuinely believed he was guiding Astara to its golden age. He viewed Lyros's pop philosophy as shallow, but he viewed Kael's art of decay with even greater contempt. For Valerius, art had one noble purpose: to immortalize beauty and greatness. He summoned Kael to his crystalline palace. The entire structure was built without a single right angle, a world of soft curves designed to evoke a sense of infinite, frictionless perfection. "I have seen your work," Valerius said, his voice a calm, measured baritone. "Your technique is rare, but you squander it on the trivial, on imagined fears. Astara is at its historical zenith. The duty of the artist is to capture that peak, not to fantasize about the abyss." The king rose and walked to a vast window overlooking the city. "I want you to paint a masterpiece for me, the definitive work of our age. Paint the glory of the Valerian era. Do this, and I will give you every honor an artist could ever dream of." Kael looked into the king's eyes. He saw no malice, but something far more dangerous: a profound, unshakable blindness, a blindness built of pride and power. "Your Majesty," Kael replied, his voice trembling but steady, "I cannot paint what isn't real. The glory of Astara is beautiful, but it is also brittle. It is built on a foundation of—" "Enough!" Valerius snapped, his composure finally breaking into a cold fury. He had offered Kael a golden bridge, and the boy had spat on it. A week later, an imperial edict was issued. Kael wasn't arrested or exiled. The punishment was far more sophisticated. He was to be honored at a grand ceremony in the central plaza. His newest, most soul-wrenching work, titled The Gilded Cage, a painting of Asteron's citizens dancing joyfully inside opulent cages of gold and diamonds, their doors slightly ajar but completely unnoticed, was to be the centerpiece. At the height of the ceremony, King Valerius, dressed in immaculate white, ascended the stage. He looked at the painting, then at the crowd. "Art must elevate the spirit, not poison it with doubt," he declared. Then, before thousands of stunned onlookers, he took a ceremonial silver hammer and brought it down with a single sharp blow right in the center of the canvas. The sound of tearing fabric and splintering wood echoed across the plaza. The gilded cage was reduced to a ruined mess. It wasn't just the destruction of a painting, it was the public execution of an artist's soul. The sound of that hammer was a message, clearer than any threat. In Astara, truth was not welcome, and Kael was no longer a heretic. He was now an enemy of the king. King Valerius's public act of destruction created a tremor he hadn't anticipated. It was too overt, too brutal. It made some people, the quiet ones, uncomfortable. Lyros, with his predator's instinct for social dynamics, sensed this shift. Kael's influence, though suppressed, was now like embers glowing under a layer of ash. All it needed was a gust of wind to reignite. Lyros knew he had to snuff it out completely, not with the king's silver hammer, but with a far sharper weapon, the whisper. A sophisticated smear campaign began. Anomalous data points started appearing on the networks. Kael wasn't a naive artist, the narrative went, but a subversive agent, an asset of the Vorlog coalition. The Vorlog, the pragmatic and militaristic empire to the north, were Astara's perpetual boogeymen. The proof? Look at his art, the sponsored posts argued. It sows fear and division. It weakens our collective spirit from within. It is psychological warfare masquerading as paint. But Lyros's masterstroke was not aimed at Kael. It was aimed at his one vulnerability, the only person left who could truly break him, Elara. Lyros traveled to Oakhaven himself. He didn't arrive as a powerful figure from the capital, but as a friend, an empathetic patron. He toured Elara's studio, marveling at her sculptures. "A talent like yours buried here," he said, his voice full of gentle tragedy. "Aethelgard is waiting for you, Elara. King Valerius is searching for the artist to helm the project of the century, a colossal statue of the first founder at the city's main gate, a symbol of our permanence. Alara's heart stopped. It was the commission of a lifetime. There is one complication, Lyros continued, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur. Your association with Kael, it's raising concerns. His art stands in opposition to everything His Majesty and Astara represent. People don't understand how an artist of your luminous vision can be connected to someone so determined to see darkness. He let the words hang in the air. I'm not asking you to do anything, he lied sweetly. I'm trying to help you, a small public statement, a clarification that your path and his have diverged, that your art is about building hope, not cataloging despair. That's all. And the commission is yours. Think about it, Alara, your future or your loyalty to a past that has no future. Lyros left, leaving Alara alone in the suffocating grip of the most terrible choice of her life. On one side, Kael, her oldest friend, the man she loved and worried over, in equal measure. On the other, everything she had ever wanted, recognition, a career, an escape from the beautiful prison of Oakhaven. She looked at her hands, calloused and stained with clay, and then at the 3D projection of the grand statue Lyros had accidentally left behind. For days, she was tormented. Finally, with a heavy, broken heart, she made her choice. She didn't write a scathing denouncement. She posted a single, carefully worded message on her public feed. Every artist must follow their own path. My path is toward the light. To create beauty and inspire hope, I wish peace for those who choose to walk in shadow. To the world, it was a graceful, diplomatic statement. To Kael, it was a knife. It came not from an enemy, but from the last friend he had in the world. The loneliness he felt before was a shadow. This was an abyss. He had lost his art, his reputation, and now he had lost Alara. He was truly, utterly alone with the cracks only he could see, in a world determined to pretend they didn't exist. And then it came. No longer a subtle crack, no longer a whispered rumor. It was a roar of steel and fire. The Vorlog coalition, the barbarians Astara had always dismissed, poured across the border. The falsified military reports, the ignored warnings, all of it collapsed into a brutal, undeniable reality. The Vorlog legions, with their cold discipline and relentless tactics, punched through Astara's vaunted defenses as if they were made of paper. Aethelgard, the city of perfection, experienced its first taste of genuine panic. The program's smiles vanished. The orderly streets became choked with terrified citizens. The city screamed. Lyros's sermons on positive manifestation evaporated into meaningless noise. No one could vibrate on a higher frequency to stop a Vorlag siege engine. In the midst of the chaos, Kael didn't run. A strange, hollow calm settled over him. His personal fears seemed laughably small compared to the continental terror that was now consuming everything. He walked out into the streets, against the tide of people scrambling for shelter. He didn't shout, "I told you so." He just spoke to anyone who would listen, his voice raw with emotion. "Stop running. Look at the truth. Acknowledge that we were wrong, that we built our pride on a rotten foundation. That admission won't save these walls, but it might save our souls. It's the only path to survival left." But to a mob fueled by fear, truth is the most offensive sound. In their ears, Kael's words were not a plea for reflection, but the gloating of the man who had prophesied their doom. Lyros's smear campaign had planted a seed, and now it bore its poisonous fruit. "It's him," someone screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Kael. "The Vorlag agent. He cursed us. He weakened us from within." Lyros, appearing like a savior in the chaos, seized the moment. "Yes," he roared, stoking the flames of their fury. "He is the source of this rot. When we needed unity, he sowed division. Punish him and purge Astara of his corruption." The crowd, no longer civilized citizens but a wounded, raging beast, swarmed Kyle. They dragged him through the streets, which were now beginning to burn. They didn't grant him a quick death. They wanted something worse. They dragged him to a forgotten structure on the city's edge, a massive, ancient water cistern from the founding days of Astara, now dry, dark, and filled with a century of muck and decay. "If you love the darkness so much," Lyros sneered, his handsome face twisted with manic triumph, "then you can have it. Let silence swallow you and your venomous prophecies." They threw him in. He fell through the darkness, the wind rushing past his ears, his body landing with a sickening thud in the cold, thick mud below. The stench of rot and stale water filled his lungs. Above the opening of the cistern was a shrinking circle of fire-lit sky. He heard the cheers of the mob, and then they were gone. He lay there, body broken, spirit shattered. He had tried. By all the gods his people had forgotten, he had tried, and he had failed. Buried alive by the very people he had spent his life trying to save. In the suffocating darkness of the silent cistern, Kyle closed his eyes and surrendered to the end. At the edge of the furious mob, a lone figure stood frozen, her face a pale mask of horror in the flickering light of the burning city. It was Alara. She had rushed back from Oakhaven the moment the news of war broke, her heart a cold stone of dread for Kyle. She arrived just in time to witness the final, terrible act. She saw the look in Kyle's eyes as they dragged him away. She heard Lyros's venomous words, and she saw them throw him into the cistern. Something inside her shattered. All her dreams of fame, of a grand career in Aethelgard, now seemed like a grotesque joke. She had betrayed the one person who truly saw the world, and for what? For the approval of these people, this mob, for a statue in a city that was now turning to ash? A wave of regret and horror so powerful it eclipsed all fear washed over her. This wasn't a calculated decision. It was a soul's reflex. She had to save him. She waited until the main crowd dispersed, leaving only a few guards Lyros had posted. With a surge of desperate cunning, Alara acted. She ran toward a nearby residential block that was engulfed in flames, screaming that she had seen a child trapped inside. The guards, torn for a crucial second between their duty and the instinct to help, turned their attention. It was all the time she needed. She sprinted to the cistern's edge, her eyes scanning frantically, and found what she was looking for, a coil of thick construction rope left behind by a long-forgotten work crew. Kale, it's me," she screamed into the darkness, her voice cracking. From the bottom of the pit, Kyle stirred. He thought he was hallucinating, but then a rope snaked down from the circle of light above, dangling just out of reach. "Grab it," Alara cried, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. "Please, Kyle, grab on." With the last of his strength, Kyle pushed himself up, dragging his body through the foul-smelling mud, and clasped the rope. Above, Alara dug her heels in and pulled, putting her entire body weight into the effort. The rough rope cut into her palms, drawing blood, but she didn't stop. Inch by torturous inch, she began to haul Kale out of the darkness. And at that exact moment, as Kyle's head finally cleared the lip of the cistern, a sound like the world breaking apart ripped through the air. The ground heaved. The great wall of Aethelgard, the ultimate symbol of Astara's invincibility, buckled and collapsed. A tidal wave of concrete and steel fell inwards, pulling the glowing towers down with it in a slow, terrible dance of destruction. A plume of fire and dust erupted into the sky. Aethelgard, the city of perfection, was gone. Alara gave one final desperate heave and pulled Kale clear. They collapsed onto the trembling ground, coughing and gasping, staring at the apocalyptic vista before them. The salvation of one soul and the damnation of a city, occurring in the same terrible heartbeat. It was a tragic, breathtaking parallel. Human connection, for one brief moment, had triumphed over mob cruelty, but it was not enough to stop the inevitable. Amid the ruins of Aethelgard, the two of them could only hold on to each other and tremble. Dawn broke over an unrecognizable Aethelgard. There were no proud towers, only the steel skeletons of them silhouetted against a gray, smoky sky. There were no clean avenues, only a thick blanket of ash, as fine as snow and the color of morning. A profound silence had fallen, heavier than any sound. The Vorlog army entered the city without celebration. They moved with a quiet, methodical purpose. There was no looting, no wanton destruction. They were led by a tall, imposing man, his face a landscape of hard-earned lines and old battles. This was General Kaelin, supreme commander of the Vorlog coalition. His soldiers soon found Kael and Alara huddled in the ruins. They were brought before the general. Kael closed his eyes, bracing himself. He was a citizen of the defeated. He had expected death in the Cistern. Now it had found him again. But instead of the cold ring of steel, he heard a sound he didn't expect, a long, weary sigh, freighted with a complex history. Kael opened his eyes. He saw the great Vorlog general looking at him, not with the triumph of a conqueror, but with a strange, almost painful empathy. Then, to the astonishment of everyone present, General Kaelin bowed his head, a gesture of deep, unmistakable respect. "Truth, painter," Kaelin said, his voice a low, resonant timbre. "We were looking for you." Kael and Alara were speechless. This was impossible. Kaelin straightened, his gaze sweeping over the ruins. "Generations ago," he began, his voice telling a story much older than this war, "my people, the Vorlog, were artists too. We also built a civilization on beauty and pride. We also ignored the cracks. We also deafened ourselves to the warnings. And the result was worse than this. We devoured ourselves from within in a catastrophic civil war of beautiful lies." He turned his gaze back to Kael. "The survivors learned a hard lesson, that the truth, no matter how ugly, is the only foundation upon which a lasting society can be built. We rebuilt ourselves on discipline, on pragmatism, and on a near-religious reverence for what is real. This invasion," Kaelin paused, choosing his words with immense care, "is not an act of greed. It is a painful, surgical intervention. We did not come to take your wealth. We came to stop you from making our same fatal mistake." Kaelin stepped forward and picked up a charred fragment of Kael's painting, The Gilded Cage. He studied the brushstrokes on the ruined piece of canvas. "I had my scouts searching for your work," he said softly. "When I look at it, I don't see treason. I see the ghosts of my own ancestors. I see the warning we never had anyone to give us. You were not Astara's enemy. You were its conscience." The twist landed with the force of a physical blow. The enemy was not a monster. The enemy was a mirror, a version of themselves that had already walked through the fire and survived. This war wasn't destruction. It was a brutal act of empathy. The validation Kael had craved his entire life had finally come, not from his own people, but from the very hand that had brought his world to ruin. In that moment, amidst the ashes, a profound and complex understanding bloomed, one that was, against all logic, strangely warm. In the days that followed, a strange new reality settled over Aethelgard. The Vorlog didn't rule with an iron fist. They organized reconstruction teams, distributed aid, and re-established basic order. They were efficient, unsentimental, but not cruel. Amidst this new landscape, Kael and Alara did not simply grieve. One morning, Kael walked back to the central plaza, to the spot where the gilded cage had been destroyed. He began to patiently, meticulously pick up the broken shards of his work, wiping the ash from each piece. Alara, without a word, knelt beside him and began to help. Their search expanded. They moved through the city, collecting other fragments of their broken world, shattered pieces of pottery from the old artisan markets, shards of stained glass from the windows of the academies, twisted pieces of metal from the fallen towers. Each fragment held a memory, a story of both glory and collapse. The remaining Asterons and the Vorlog soldiers watched them with curiosity. What were they doing? Trying to piece together a past that was irrevocably gone. But Kael and Alara had a different vision. On the largest surviving wall of the plaza, a great expanse of scorched concrete, they began a new project. Using the fragments they had gathered, they started to create a massive mosaic. They weren't trying to replicate the old Aethelgard. They were creating something new, an abstract tapestry of brokenness and rebirth. The cracks were not hidden. They became the main lines of the composition. The sharp edges were not smoothed over. They were arranged to create a rough, honest texture. The colors were not the bright, optimistic hues of old Astara, but a somber palette of ashen gray, rust brown, punctuated by the occasional defiant sparkle of a surviving piece of colored glass, a tiny fleck of hope. They worked from dawn until dusk. Slowly, others began to join them. First, it was the small group of awakened artists and thinkers who had first sought Kael out. Then came ordinary citizens, people who had lost everything but found a small measure of purpose in the simple act of cementing a broken piece into place. And finally, even some of the Vorlog soldiers, their duties done for the day, came to help. There were few words exchanged between the two groups, but their shared labor was a language of its own. The mosaic grew each day. It wasn't beautiful by old Asteron standards. It was scarred, it was melancholy, but it was profoundly true. It wasn't a portrait of a city, it was a portrait of its scars. It was a testament that beauty isn't always found in perfection, but in the courage to mend what has been broken. It was the first act of healing, not by forgetting, but by transforming pain into art, by weaving an anthem from the ashes. Months passed. The great mosaic was complete, standing as a silent, honest witness in the center of the plaza. A new city, humbler and more human, was slowly rising around it, built not of lumen steel and pride, but of brick, wood, and humility. The final scene of this story is not a grand ceremony or a great prophecy. It takes place in a small courtyard where a new school has been built. Kael and Alara are there, surrounded by a group of children. There are Asterons, their eyes still holding a shadow of loss, and there are Vorlog children, the sons and daughters of the soldiers, curiously exploring their new home. On simple wooden tables are lumps of brown clay, brought all the way from the valley of Oakhaven. Kael and Alara aren't teaching them grand artistic theories, they are teaching them to feel. "Don't try to make something perfect," Kael says softly, his voice now free of its old anguish, filled only with a gentle patience. He takes a piece of clay, closes his eyes, and simply holds it. Don't force it, listen to it. What does this piece of clay want to be? A leaf, a river, a simple round stone? The truth is already there in your hands. Our job is just to help it show itself. Alara smiles and kneels beside a little Vorlog girl who is struggling with her lump of clay. "There's no right or wrong," she whispers. "Just let your hands play. Sometimes the most beautiful shapes come from our happiest accidents." The children, at first timid, begin to relax. Laughter starts to bubble up. Small hands begin to knead, to poke, to explore. They don't create masterpieces. They create lumpy, imperfect, wonderful things. An Astaran boy shows his bird to a Vorlog girl, who in turn proudly displays her star. Between them, there is no history, no enmity, only the pure, shared joy of creation. Kael looks at Alara, and in their shared gaze is an understanding deeper than love. They had found their new covenant. It wasn't a promise etched in stone from on high. It was the simple, sacred act of passing wisdom, empathy, and most of all, hope to the next generation. It was the belief that truth and beauty are not things to be imposed, but things to be discovered within. and that true reconciliation doesn't come from treaties but from the simple image of children of two former enemies playing together in the dirt. Cale looks out at the great mosaic, shimmering in the morning sun. He finally understood. The purpose of a truth painter wasn't to warn of the end. It was to show where a new beginning could take root. Not on a perfect canvas, but in the beautiful, honest cracks of a broken world. And that, he thought, was the most beautiful art of all. And so the story of Cael and Alara, of Astara and the Vorlog, comes to a close. But perhaps, in its ending, it has opened something in you. It's a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is not to build taller towers, but to have the courage to look at the cracks in our own foundations. That healing comes not from forgetting, but from bravely gathering the broken pieces of our past and making them a part of who we are now. I hope this journey we've taken together has offered you a new perspective, a moment of peace, or simply some good company for a little while. If stories like this resonate with you, stories that dive into the human spirit, that explore the shadows and search for the light in the most unexpected places, then I hope you'll consider joining our community. A single click on the subscribe button costs nothing, but it's a tremendous signal flare in the dark. It tells us that you want to hear more, and it ensures that we can find each other again for the next story. Thank you for listening. Be well and be kind to yourself and to others.